So, the 90s, a decade some would describe as one of the best or even seen as the golden age of anime. While watching vintage anime from this period, there's always this supernatural yet pleasant sensation of time suddenly slowing down, a blanket being draped over you, while a reminiscent voice tells you that everything's going to be okay. I believe it's safe to say that most aren't absolved from this sensation. There's reasons why some might go back to consume these older series and films, and for justified purpose. I should be discreet when saying I don't mean every show that's ever released in the 90s, though collectively there's an irreplicable style and fervor that anime from this era present, and there's certainly more than a handful that stood out from the vast sea of series, films, and OVAs that debuted at this time. In a modern world where everything is moving far too fast, these anime have always served as a time capsule, a place in time that not only predated modern entertainment, but serves as a beacon of wistfulness of what was and still could be for future generations. Some may even long for a place in their lives where times were simpler, they had more free time, and when responsibilities were near non-existent. So with that said, join me as we go back in time to reminisce on some of the reasons why 90s anime are so timeless. One of the most recognized characteristics of 90s anime is by far the unmistakable dated look. This archaic design is very much a staple of its time. It's what gives it allure and why when descending into any series or film from this era, almost anyone can experience a feeling that is bizarre yet satisfyingly reminiscent. A sensation that can otherwise be best described as nostalgia. A major contributing factor in why that is attributed to the specific stylization during the 90s zeitgeist, which was primarily due to things like limitations in technology. So just a brief history on some of the techniques used that would allow for such an identifiable and memorable style during this period. The meticulous level of detail in 90s anime can be ascribed to the hand-drawn and painted process through what is known as cell animation. For each frame, animators would trace finalized drawings on translucent celluloid sheets. There were also separate cells or layers to differentiate between characters, foregrounds, and even backgrounds. However, with cells, there were often limits in how many you could stack on top of each other before the picture became altered. Cells were also met with their challenges as they were prone to things like scratches if repeatedly used during the shooting process, so most often it was advantageous if they could avoid continuous reshootings. This was all quite a long arduous process, but would signify the passion of animators and would define the look we all know and love. We can also look to series and films that never officially aired or debuted in Japan until the mid to late 80s. Series and films like Castle in the Sky, Kiki's Delivery Service, Ranma 1/2, or even Dragon Ball Z. And while seeing an official 80s release, they never saw a release or a localization in the US until the 1990s. We can even point to films like Akira that would have also released in the late 80s, though some would say took part in defining the 90s as most were still discovering the anime art form. Viewers may even resonate with the vast array of striking color palettes that were utilized during this period. As an example, and to really put things into perspective, in the 1988 film Akira, there were just over 300 distinct colors that were used in production, whereas films such as Ghibli's 1997 Princess Mononoke utilized over 500 colors in their paint department. Also, a bit of a fun fact, this film was so ambitious that colors would need to be imported from Canada before the film's completion. We also witnessed this vintage style in the critically acclaimed 1995 film Ghost in the Shell. Something that should be pointed out, and near the middle of this movie, we get multiple views within the setting of what is depicted as Hong Kong. It's a sequence of varied shots that are incredibly detailed, where no dialogue is exchanged, and what you can take from it is not only entirely interpretive, but leaves you astonished. And of course, there's also the grainy texture, which is caused by film stock or telecine equipment. This tool was often used in processing and transferring motion pictures to VHS tapes or TV broadcast. Lastly is the recognized 4:3 aspect ratio. This was a result of the standard for television and from technology limitations in the 20th century. By virtue of all of these components combined is what is known as the signature aesthetic of 90s anime, an outcome that is unparalleled in its own right. As a byproduct of such an iconic style, we also instinctively cling to a mystery which could be best depicted as tranquil. A novelty that embodies the essence of 90s anime is the extraordinary worlds. This, accompanied with the ambience those worlds provide at any given time, makes for a match made in heaven for loyal viewers. Whether that captured mood arises from bright skies, eerie nights, or calm twilights. Whichever it may be, there's an unequivocal cozy feeling when seeing these locations. There's even series that captures beautiful scenery like Lupin III, or Cowboy Bebop that, while despite being set in space, somehow captures this warm but soulful essence. And of course, course one of my favorite films, Princess Mononoke, taking place in a sacred forest that captures trees and spirits beyond imagination. There is this significance in both witnessing and being a part of these scenes or settings. They are entirely ambiguous to the audience, so much so that the interpretation can carry on years later by how you remember that world. It's moments like these that are enough to influence one's own life. They can sway the perception of how one views a fictitious world versus one that is of contrary. They quell you from whatever trials you may experience in reality, even if only temporary. And most importantly for some, these moments can make one wish they were part of the world itself. There's many examples, and some of which where, much like myself, others have also yet to see. Another favorite film that best represents the aforementioned beautiful scenery and atmosphere is Studio Ghibli's 1991 film, Castle in the Sky. At the latter end of the movie, our two characters are facing conflict, but eventually reach their goal by encountering a valued phenomenon within fiction. They arrive at a destination that is transcendent, a floating fortress, or quite literally, a castle in the sky. We not only see an outside perspective, but also gaze inside of the castle, where there's countless corridors, relics, and treasures, all of which tells a story of a time period that predates the characters. Destinations as stunning as this are enough to compel viewers to want to explore if granted the opportunity. This is one of many reasons why Ghibli films are just so great, and if you haven't watched one as of yet, well, you won't regret it. So I'll contrast this with another example from a worldwide popular series, Dragon Ball Z. Months ago I decided to go back and revisit this anime. Something that stood out most was the amount of effort and detail placed into a collapsing Namek. Toei does a great job at depicting the mood and gravitas of what the fight between these two had caused. And while scenery like this is wonderfully detailed and to be appreciated, it's enough to strike resistance into the audience by way of feeling reluctant of visiting such a dreadful place. There's also the feeling of worry for the characters who are so desperately trying to escape, which is something else that defined the decade of 90s anime. It's impossible to go on without mentioning some of the characters that define 90s anime. This facet was one of the cornerstones that shaped many anime during this time, and likely the reason why so many continue to consume and follow cherished series in modern day. Whether it be watching the controlled but at times unbridled rage of Goku, or witnessing Yusuke have an initially nonchalant outlook on life, but then finding resolve after witnessing heartache through death. Even seeing Lane become, well, terrifying, and of course appreciating the magnetic suave demeanor of Spike. Those are just some notable characters, as truthfully there's too many to mention. Although we also did receive the famous Akira Tetsuo meme.
Leave me alone!
Yeah, that's definitely not canon. So anyway, the characters most have come to know and love from this era are courageous, relatable, fallible, and of course without question, inspiring. They're characters who possess traits that make you want to follow them and even befriend them. Then for others, not so much. Anime characters from the 90s were for all intent and purpose, believable. Even right down to the clothes they wore. They were not only incredibly stylish, but further added to their personalities. In some cases, the apparel was parallel to real-world fashion of the 90s decade. For some, you wanted to look just like them, and in some cases, be them. Many series focused on themes like self-discovery or overcoming trials, which were often cathartic, and even the transition from adolescence to adulthood. These things resonated with viewers from all ages on a personal level. It's through these intrinsic connections with such characters that we're able to pick ourselves back up, and so much as to shift our worldview in a more positive perspective. These characters very much grew with their audience, whether it be by values, strength, or creating lifelong friendships. We even got to bear witness to what is undoubtedly one of the greatest things to transpire out of the 90s, the birth of a power couple from creators of both Sailor Moon and Yu Hakusho. I mean, the chances of something like this happening are 1 in a billion. But that aside, I believe there's something we can all learn from some of the more dated anime that is outside of things like atmosphere, aesthetic, or even characters. Something that, while a trial to face for some, comes as captivating for others. It may be safe to say that right now, some are likely facing an existential crisis in where they'd place themselves within the anime fandom. I'll explain. Whereas at one point anime was a niche art form and a deep chasm where fanatics proudly assembled to chant their favorite series, characters, or even moments, only to simultaneously be mocked and shunned away from society, they're now facing a conundrum in this new age of preferred consumption, and understandably so. Some are experiencing difficulty in finding balance in an era where suddenly everyone's accepting of a once exiled fandom and form of entertainment. Others of similar belief may feel that with the advent of anime becoming both mainstream and more accessible, that it caused oversaturation among the fandom, and a loss of what gave such a niche art form novelty. In other words, if everyone's unique, then
no one will be.
Currently, there's a rift or divide. I'd be dishonest if to say at one point I weren't a contender for sharing the same sentiment. And while I believe all things said moments ago could be recognized, we really don't get anywhere in feeling or saying these things ad nauseum. To the dismay of some, the era of anime being mainstream is here to stay. And for the old heads, find solace in knowing that you are never alone in feeling your grievances. But sadly, it's time to pack it up. Look, it's been a great ride. And though some may feel this way, it's also important to acknowledge that, well, there's another side to this phenomenon. Conversely, we have those who have either never seen anime or have only seen fragments of what it has to offer, who are now finding their identity within recent years through some of the more dated films and series. Whether it be things like assimilating to what a character stands for, how a character confronts their adversities and emotions, or even bonding themselves to a stunning world in which they'd rather be against one they'd rather not. It's no mistake that some who appreciate 90s anime wishes at some point we enter a new renaissance of what made many of the older beloved series so profound, while for others, it doesn't quite seem as though we've captured a modern day era of such a spectacle taking place, though there's examples we can point to and remaining hopeful of what could be for future works. With studios like Kyoto Animation, we see incredible detail and passion placed into every sequence of what would be akin to a 90s anime but with a more modern approach, or even Ufotable, who uses bold, vibrant colors, beautiful lighting, and even captures dynamic camera angles with remarkable choreography. Of course, these are only a handful of studios as there's tons of other examples. Perhaps trying to recapture the novelty of 90s anime as a retelling of existing stories that have already been told isn't the best resolution. As an observation, we've seen examples of companies attempting to recreate the essence of what made these series so great. These attempts were either met with no success or left fans with a feeling that can only be best described as apathy. It's no surprise viewers would look back to the past to what are considered the classics. Series and films from the 90s were very much products of their time while simultaneously being timeless. I'm sure most would agree it's best to simply let them be. It's possible to be both optimistic of future anime while also recognizing and appreciating much of what came before. The 90s will always hold a place in hearts as a decade that was fearless of risk in what some might think in its approach to art and storytelling. It's a decade of aspiration in what would follow, and lastly, charming to both modern audiences and those who were of that time. Hopefully, this might have resonated with someone out there. Whether you're for one side or the other, by all means share your thoughts. Lastly, if you enjoyed the video and would like to see more just like this, be sure to like and stick around for future content. For right now, that's all I have for you. Take care, and I'll see you all next time.